If you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them? Buddhism's answer. Have you ever wondered why your mind can feel like a runaway train? One moment you're focused, and the next, you're buried in a memory, a worry, or a random song lyric. These experiences are so universal that we rarely stop to question them. Who is actually doing all this thinking? If I am not my thoughts, who or what is behind them? This isn't just a philosophical riddle, it's a doorway into understanding your own mind and suffering ache, one the Buddha walked through more than 20,500 years ago. In this video, we'll explore a powerful question from both a traditional Buddhist and modern psychological perspective. We'll go far beyond surface-level mindfulness tips to uncover how Buddhism explains the arising of thoughts, the illusion of the thinker, and how we can live with greater awareness and inner peace. Drawing from core teachings such as anatta, non-self, pratisamutpada, dependent origination, and the Satipatthana Sutta, we'll unravel not just what thinking is, but what it isn't. And throughout, I'll be weaving in stories from the Pali Canon, real-world examples, and contemporary neuroscience to make this journey not only profound, but relatable. So sit comfortably, open your mind, and prepare to meet the silent observer within you, the one who's always been there, behind the thoughts. Imagine you are sitting on the sofa, sipping tea, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a thought pops into your head. Did I say the wrong thing in that conversation yesterday? No warning, no reason. It just appears. This is how most of us experience our mind, as a constant stream of uninvited guests. Thoughts show up, unannounced and unstoppable. They pull us in, spin stories, trigger emotions, and often we just go along for the ride. But the Buddha offered a radically compassionate and liberating way to look at this process. The mind is not broken, it's simply untrained. In Buddhism, we begin not by judging our thoughts, but by seeing them for what they are: impermanent, conditioned events. They don't arise from a permanent self or an unchanging soul. Instead, they come into being due to countless causes and conditions, what the Buddha called pratityasamutpada, or dependent origination. Your thought about yesterday's conversation didn't come from nowhere. It may have been triggered by the smell of your tea, a tone of voice on the TV, or a subtle emotional tension still lingering in your chest. Everything is connected. And every thought, no matter how random it feels, is the result of this intricate web of causes. But here's where we get stuck. We believe the thoughts. We identify with them. We think I am the one thinking this. And so, when a painful memory arises, we suffer. Not because of the thought itself, but because of the way we cling to it. Buddhism invites us to investigate. What if thoughts are just thoughts? What if they're not truths, not commands, not personal? I once worked with a man named James who struggled with obsessive, anxious thoughts. He believed they revealed something wrong with him. In our practice together, I guided him to observe these thoughts without judgment, like watching clouds pass in the sky. Over time, he stopped believing everything his mind said. He found space, freedom. That's what mindfulness gives us, not control over thoughts, but freedom from their control. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha lays out a simple but profound method for training the mind. Observe the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects. When it comes to thoughts, this means noticing them the way you'd watch traffic from a sidewalk. No need to jump into every car, just observe. Modern neuroscience is beginning to confirm what the Buddha taught, that awareness changes the brain. When we observe thoughts rather than react to them, we activate different neural pathways. The mind becomes less reactive, more stable. But don't take my word for it. Try this. Close your eyes for 30 seconds and just watch your mind. What thoughts arise? Do they have a pattern? Can you see how they link together? One thought sparking another, like fire touching dry grass? This is the nature of thought. It's like a river, not a stone. It flows, it moves. And you don't need to stop the river, you just need to learn to stand on the bank. The Buddha, in his own journey to awakening, sat beneath the Bodhi tree and did just that. He watched his mind. He didn't fight his thoughts. He didn't try to force enlightenment. He simply observed. And through that clear seeing, he discovered the truth of suffering and the path beyond it. To witness our thoughts with compassion rather than judgment is an act of love. It's the beginning of wisdom. You are not your anger. You are not your fear. You are not your shame. These are weather systems moving through the vast sky of your mind. So when a thought arises, no matter how unpleasant, no matter how persistent, ask yourself, can I let this be just a thought? Can I hold it with kindness, then let it pass? In doing so, you begin to touch the spacious awareness the Buddha spoke of. The peace that comes not from escaping life, but from truly meeting it, one thought at a time. Let's start with something that most people assume without question, that there's a you behind your thoughts, directing them like a conductor leads an orchestra. It feels that way, doesn't it? That sense of I behind the scenes, choosing, evaluating, narrating life as it unfolds. But what happens when you look for this I? Where is it? Buddhism calls this inquiry the path of anatta, or non-self. Not to diminish your humanity, far from it. This teaching is rooted in profound compassion. It shows us that most of our suffering comes from clinging to something that isn't really there, the illusion of a permanent self. When the Buddha encouraged his disciples to examine experience, he didn't ask them to accept doctrines blindly. He pointed them to the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These are the building blocks of our moment-to-moment experience. But he also said, this is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Why? Because none of these aggregates remain constant. None of them can be controlled. None of them exists independently. They arise and fall, shift and pass. So if you are none of these, what remains? Here's something deeply liberating. What we call self is really a process. Thoughts arise, feelings arise, perceptions arise, all based on causes and conditions. There is no thinker behind the thoughts. There is only thinking. Imagine you're walking through a forest and suddenly you hear birdsong. You didn't create it. It just appeared in your awareness. Thoughts are like that. They appear in consciousness, not from a self, but from interdependent forces, memories, sensations, impressions, past actions. I remember speaking with a woman named Carla who had spent years in therapy trying to fix herself. She believed she was broken. But when she began meditating and exploring the teaching of anatta, something softened. She realized she wasn't broken. She was just clinging to an identity made up of stories and thoughts, none of which were permanent or absolute. The Buddha often used metaphors to make this insight clear. One of the most vivid is the chariot analogy. If you take away the wheels, the axles, the reins, the frame, where is the chariot? There is no chariot apart from its parts. Likewise, there is no you apart from your body, feelings, and thoughts. The self is a convenient label, not an enduring entity. This can feel unsettling at first, like the ground is slipping out from under you, but it's also deeply peaceful. Because when you stop clinging to a solid self, you stop trying to protect it. You stop trying to control everything. You begin to relax. The story of the monk Kamaka is a beautiful example. He explored the 5 aggregates in meditation and saw none of them was self. Yet when asked if he was fully free, he replied, I do not see a self in any of the 5 aggregates, but still there is a subtle sense of I am. Over time, even that subtle clinging dissolved. This wasn't nihilism. It was freedom from illusion. There's so much pressure in our culture to define who we are, to build a brand, an identity, a narrative. But what if freedom isn't in defining yourself, but in letting go of needing to be anyone at all? Thoughts come, thoughts go, and the belief I am thinking is just another thought. When you really look, what you find isn't a solid self, but spaciousness, a clear, open awareness that doesn't need to cling to anything. That awareness isn't a person. It isn't a thing. It's not an object. It's the condition in which all things arise. In that clarity, there's peace. Not the peace of numbness, but the peace of not fighting what is, the peace of not carrying the burden of a fictional self. So the next time you're caught in a mental loop, worrying, regretting, judging, pause and ask, who is thinking this? Don't answer intellectually. Just look. You may find, as the Buddha did, that the thinker is nowhere to be found. And in that absence, there is tremendous presence. Awareness, in the Buddhist tradition, is not some lofty ideal or spiritual gimmick. It's the very heart of the practice. It's what allows us to meet our moment-to-moment experience with clarity, gentleness, and a deep compassion for ourselves and others. In Pali, this quality is called sati, often translated as mindfulness. But it's more than just noticing things. It's knowing how to relate to what we notice without clinging, without resistance. Imagine a clear mirror. It reflects whatever is in front of it: sunlight, shadow, beauty, distortion, without judgment, without holding on. That's what awareness does. And the more we cultivate it, the less caught we are in our automatic reactions. This is where real transformation begins, not from suppressing thoughts or emotions, but by being fully present with them, witnessing their impermanent nature, and letting go of the belief that we need to control them. A monk named Anuruddha once struggled deeply with distraction during meditation. He thought something was wrong with him, that he lacked discipline or spiritual maturity. But the Buddha didn't scold him or tell him to try harder. Instead, he guided him to simply observe the arising and passing of thoughts, sensations, and mental states, with kindness, not resistance. Over time, Anuruddha's awareness grew stable and luminous, not because he forced it, but because he stopped fighting. That's a lesson so many of us need today. We live in a world of constant stimulation and demand, and it's easy to fall into a pattern of reactivity. Emails, headlines, social media feeds, all designed to trigger a response. But awareness gives us a moment of pause, a sacred gap, a choice. Let's say you're feeling overwhelmed, deadlines piling up, your phone buzzing, a disagreement replaying in your head. In that moment, the most radical act isn't fixing everything. It's pausing, taking a breath, noticing what's happening in your body. Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw tight? Is your breath shallow? Awareness starts there, in the body. That's why the Buddha always began with mindfulness of the body in meditation. Because our thoughts can lie to us, but the body tells the truth. As you notice what's present, you're not analyzing or fixing, you're witnessing. And that witnessing itself begins to soften the mind. You might notice, oh, I'm caught in worry. That noticing is mindfulness, that is awareness. And that is where suffering begins to ease. But here's the key, we do this with compassion. Without that, mindfulness becomes just another form of self-monitoring, another way to judge ourselves. True awareness says, this too belongs. The joy, the grief, the boredom, the anger, all of it has a place in the heart of awareness. And from that place, insight arises. Insight doesn't mean having a grand revelation. Often, it's something very quiet. Like noticing that a thought you've believed for years, I'm not enough, is just a thought. Or seeing that you don't need to react to every inner impulse. Or realizing that your breath is always there, a steady companion. One of my favorite metaphors from the Buddhist tradition is that of the sky and clouds. The mind is the sky. Thoughts and emotions are the clouds. Sometimes the clouds are light and wispy. Sometimes they're dark and stormy. But the sky, your awareness, is never harmed. It never clings to or resists the weather. It simply holds it all. When we identify with the clouds, we suffer. But when we rest in the awareness of the sky, we find peace. Neuroscience is beginning to catch up to this truth. Studies show that regular mindfulness practice changes the structure of the brain, enhancing areas related to attention and emotional regulation. But the real magic isn't in the science. It's in the moment you choose to return to presence. That moment when you stop, breathe, and remember, I don't have to believe everything I think. Cultivating awareness isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming honest. It's about showing up for life. All of it, with open eyes and a soft heart. So the next time you sit in silence, or walk down the street, or wash the dishes, ask yourself gently, can I be here for this? Not to change it, not to escape it, just to meet it with awareness. That meeting, tender, courageous, and clear, is the beginning of freedom. If we stop here with just awareness and insight, it's easy to think this is only a contemplative path, something that belongs in a monastery, not in the noise of modern life. But the brilliance of Buddhist wisdom is that it's endlessly practical. It's meant for every part of your day. When you're in traffic, when your kid is crying, when your boss is breathing down your neck, or when your loneliness hits like a wave at midnight. The Buddha didn't teach escape. He taught engagement. Wise, compassionate engagement with whatever life presents. So how do we live this understanding? We begin with what the Buddha called yoniso manasikara, wise attention. It's not just noticing something, but noticing it in a way that leads to clarity and liberation, not confusion or more clinging. Let's take a common example. You're having an argument with your partner. Your mind is racing. Judgment, blame, maybe shame. With unwise attention, you follow those thoughts like a dog chasing cars. You fuel the fire. But with wise attention, you pause and ask, What's actually happening in my body right now? What story is my mind telling? Is it true? That pause is everything. It creates space. And in that space, choice becomes possible. Instead of reacting from pain, you might respond from care. You might listen instead of defend. You might even realize that the argument isn't about the dishes. It's about a deeper need for connection or to be seen. This is what Buddhist practice looks like in real life. It's messy, human, and deeply tender. And when things go wrong, because they will, we don't beat ourselves up. We start again. Every breath is a new beginning. The Buddha also taught about the power of intention. Not in the sense of forcing outcomes, but setting the direction of our heart. Before you enter a conversation, a meeting, or even just your day, ask, what intention do I want to bring? Kindness, honesty, patience? Intentions shape actions, and repeated actions shape character. This is karma in motion, not fate, but formation. You're not doomed by your habits, but you are formed by them. And the good news is, you can form new ones. Mindfulness, when combined with clear intention, becomes a training ground. Everyday tasks become practice. Washing dishes, feel the water, the texture, the breath. Standing in line, notice the impatience and breathe kindness into it. Working late, recognize the tiredness and care for your body. This isn't about being spiritual all the time. It's about being real, being awake. Another essential application is cultivating uka, equanimity. This doesn't mean indifference. It means balance. A heart that can hold joy and sorrow without collapsing into either. This is especially vital in relationships and work, places where we often get entangled in control, fear, or the need to be right. Think of it like surfing. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to ride them. Equanimity is your surfboard. It doesn't flatten the ocean, but it helps you stay upright when the waves come. When you make a mistake, when someone criticizes you, or when you're facing loss, equanimity says, this too, not as resignation, but as recognition. This too is part of being human. To integrate these teachings, it helps to reflect each day. What did I learn today about my mind? Where did I react? Where did I respond with wisdom? This reflection is not to judge, but to grow. Finally, let's return to something simple, the breath. It's always here, always now. When you're overwhelmed, anxious, or disconnected, return to the breath. Feel it in your belly, your chest, your nose. It grounds you. It reconnects you to the body, to awareness, to the moment. It's the anchor of the present. So yes, Buddhist practice is profound, but it's also simple. It's the way you drink your coffee, the way you listen to a friend, the way you forgive yourself. When we take these insights off the cushion and into the world, something beautiful happens. Our life becomes the path, not something separate from practice, but the very ground of it. And that is how we live in freedom, not someday, but now. As we conclude this exploration, gently return to the first question. If you are not your thoughts, then who is thinking them? The Buddha's teachings invite us to let go of the idea of a solid eternal self owning the mind, and instead rest in a deeper awareness, a spacious, compassionate presence witnessing all of our experiences. This presence is not some distant, unreachable ideal. It is the heart of your everyday life. It is the quiet space between your thoughts, the stillness beneath the noise, the kindness that welcomes every part of you, even the parts that struggle or suffer. Living with this understanding is living with freedom. Freedom from endless mental chatter, freedom from the grip of painful stories, freedom from the need to fix or fight endlessly. It is a freedom that opens the door to peace, compassion, and joy. Not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer trapped by the mind's illusions. So the next time a thought arises, whether joyful or painful, invite it in with gentle curiosity. See it as a passing guest across the sky of your mind. Remember, you are not the guest. You are the vast, open sky itself. Thank you for sharing this time and space with me. May your journey be kind. May your heart be open, and may you always find your way back to the clear, compassionate awareness that has always been with you.